Well, like Maria said, again, thanks to everyone for joining the webinar. And this is our first webinar that we're doing in the fall. And this webinar is coming at a very interesting time. We, as a global community, we have seen an increase in the number of extreme weather events with consequences that we are already seeing in the U.S. with regards to the 2 recent hurricanes we've had here. But as we well know, there's been other events over the past decade that have really made the issue of business continuity and disaster preparedness very critical for our industry. And so today we are very honored to have 2 distinguished speakers who will offer their perspectives on this topic. And before I introduce them, I would just like to say that obviously we are, as we're having this webinar today, we are cognizant of the challenges that are faced by our other utility friends in Texas, as well as now in Florida. And so we'll keep them in mind as we go through this webinar. But I just think as an industry, the challenges in front of us as it relates to keeping the lights on, keeping resilience at the forefront is something that we'll definitely keep in mind and will be on our minds going forward. So with that, I'd like to introduce our 2 speakers today. First is Mr. Rob Jameson. Rob is actually, he's currently the Chief Executive Officer at Orion in New Zealand. Rob has been with Orion for a number of years. He's held numerous positions, including a General Manager for Commercial, as well as other managerial positions that make him very well positioned today to tell us about the experiences and share his thoughts on the topic of the day. And then also, other speaker is from Pacific Gas and Electric, that Tessa Burns. Tessa has over 15 years of experience in this area of emergency management and business continuity. At PG&E, she conducts emergency and business continuity planning and supports the business in a number of ways. Prior to joining PG&E, she served as disaster manager with the American Red Cross, and she's also been involved in a number of other disaster relief initiatives in North America and in Canada, and in California to be more specific. So we could not have have 2 very distinguished individuals who will provide us their insights on this topic. And so to kick things off, I will ask Tessa to give her presentation, and when she's done, Rob will then give his, and then we'll begin with the Q&A. So Tessa, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Lawrence. And Colin, if you could, thank you. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So as Lawrence Jones mentioned, the recent disasters such as Hurricane Irma, Hurricane Harvey, South Asia floods in India, Nepal, and Bangladesh, and also the earthquake in Mexico have resulted in millions forced from their homes and extensive damage. And these really are a stark reminder to us in the utility industry that it's really essential that we build this organizational readiness so we can restore service effectively and efficiently to our customers, but also while ensuring business continuity of our operations. And in this presentation, I'll go through how we've built organizational readiness at PG&E and what preparations we've made so we can scale quickly in the event of a disaster so our response is more efficient. So overall, I'll go through just a brief overview to give you context of what disasters we face here in California, some of the asset resilience actions we've taken, what kinds of plans do we have in place and training, what organizational structure do we use, how do we integrate in business continuity, so how do we scale our logistics, damage modeling and other technologies, how do we leverage that to improve our overall response, mutual assistance, communications, what are our restoration strategies, and how do we work with our external partners, and at the end of the day, how do we test this through actual incidents and exercises as well. So overall, from PG&E, located in California, we were incorporated back in 1905 as a dual commodity gas and electric utility in California. We have a service population of 16 million people, 5.6 million electric, 4.7 million gas. We're the biggest provider of electric and gas in the country for a single utility. And our service territory is over 70,000 square miles. And we face many different risks here in California. And I won't go through all of these, but at a high level, different storms, wildland fires, earthquakes, flooding, cybersecurity is an also concern, and with one of the largest natural disaster risks in this region is earthquakes. And for the likelihood of an earthquake actually occurring, there's a 72% likelihood of a 6.7 magnitude or greater earthquake here just in the Bay Area. It's actually over 90% throughout California. And, while it says over the next 30 years and sounds like a lot of time, they actually can't tell whether that's going to happen tomorrow or 5 or 10 years from now. So really, it's not a matter of if, but when. And later on in this presentation, I'll go through how can we have that rapid and effective response, and how are we utilizing technologies and damage modeling so that we can minimize that customer disruption. Now, on the preparedness front, we started a program called the Emergency Management Advancement Program following the 2010 San Bruno gas transmission pipeline rupture, and that had resulted in an explosion and fire. And it became clear that we needed further improvements in our assets, planning, and response. And we started to see more of a shift from being more reactionary in response to being much more proactive. And as part of this initiative, we created cross-functional teams across the enterprise that were focused on improving our core capabilities. So, looking at, rapid activation of command sites, rapid assessment teams, improving logistics and technology, working with our governmental partners on identifying what do they see as the community priorities for restoration so they can restore the communities, and pre-identifying some leadership teams that could be deployed to other areas. And then we continue to test those concepts through incidents as well as company exercises. And we expanded the outreach to external stakeholders because coordination and communication is a real key part of our overall response. And for asset resiliency, this is a key piece to see how can we mitigate those effects of a disaster. And we've invested approximately $1 billion capital over the past 10 years in our electric infrastructure. So we've replaced, substation transformers, breakers, we've retrofitted buildings, we have SCADA penetration approaching 80%, and SCADA is supervisory control and data acquisition, and that provides to our control center operators the ability to remotely have visibility, monitoring, and control of major devices. And we also have blizzard, fault location, isolation, and service restoration. And this is a self-healing distribution circuit technology that helps us to restore customers in less than 5 minutes. For example, can automatically locate and isolate a faulted section of a circuit, reconfigure that circuit, and reroute power to restore service to as many customers as possible in a short time frame. And on the gas side, approximately $2.5 billion were invested in distribution pipeline replacement. And just, won't go through all this, but just the key message is that we don't have any cast iron pipe left through these improvements. And that was a real risk, especially in an area of California where earthquake is a key hazard. So we've replaced that all with new modern plastic. Now, before I get into disaster planning, since this is an international audience, one, having a plan is important so you can avoid what's in the comic here. But secondly, just wanted to quickly go over some terms. On the emergency response plan, when I'm talking to that in this presentation, we're kind of focused on restoring service to our customers. And that is, has the organizational structure, how do we manage resources, how do we coordinate our efforts in that service restoration. And our business continuity plans are focused on how we're continuing our operations in the face of a disruption. And that could be a disaster or emergency, but it could also be like a fire that occurs in the building that causes you to use a backup facility, or a tech down situation for an application that causes you to use your tech down procedures. And a disaster recovery plan is protecting and recovering IT infrastructure and applications once those are disrupted. How do you get those back online? So for emergency response plans, at PG&E we have a base plan, or a company emergency response plan, where kind of information that's common across the company is included in that. And we also have functional annexes to that base plan, where it gives additional details for electric, gas, logistics, emergency communications, IT, et cetera. And we also have, while the base plan and functional annexes are all hazard and scalable, there are some very specific actions that may occur for specific hazards. For example, earthquake or cybersecurity. And we'll have a hazard-specific annex for that that goes into additional detail that's not covered in the base plan and functional annexes. And we conduct role training and trainings on these plans, because it's really important not to just have a plan that sits on a shelf, but that you can access that plan and know what's in it and know your role beforehand through being trained on that. For business continuity plans, one of the first steps in this business continuity life cycle is a risk assessment, and that's where we identify the risks, threats, and vulnerabilities that can adversely affect PG&E and our critical processes, and then evaluate what's the likelihood of those things occurring. And then we look at the current controls that we have in place, and if there are any other mitigation efforts that we can do to help improve those controls. And then through a business impact analysis that's conducted by our corporate emergency preparedness and response department, we look at what are the critical processes within the company, and then what's the impact to the company in the event those functions or processes are interrupted. And we'll look at impacts to safety, environmental, compliance, reliability, reputation, and financial. And we'll look at what are those time-sensitive processes, and we'll develop the strategies and plans within the lines of business that own those processes. And they'll train and test those plans and continuously improve them over time. Now, in terms of the structure, the Emergency Preparedness and Response Department is corporate-wide in focus, and they work with each of the lines of business on their functional annexes to the company emergency response plan. And we also have, our department works with the lines of business on their business continuity plans. And as you can see from this, EP&R conducts that business impact analysis that I mentioned. We review approved plans. We also work closely with the business continuity coordinators on their planning and training. And the business process owners, those are typically directors or senior director levels who review and approve the plans, and they designate a business continuity coordinator. And that coordinator works with EP&R on a day-to-day basis. They prepare and maintain those plans. They do the trainings and exercises, but we support them, as well as other subject matter experts. So again, EP&R is that overarching corporate entity of support, and we work with the lines of business on their functional annexes to the company emergency response plan and business continuity plans. Now, in the response and how we're organized for the response, we utilize the Incident Command System, or ICS, and that's used by public and private agencies to organize their incident management operations. So ICS is really that standardized on-scene emergency management concept that's designed to allow us to adopt an integrated organizational structure. And at PG&E, we have emergency centers at the division level, the regional level, and at the company-wide level. At the company-wide level, it's our Emergency Operations Center. And in that Emergency Operations Center, or EOC, We help secure additional needed resources to support the field, help set priorities, and we're also responsible for all external communications and coordinating that. And for base camps, I'll get to this when I talk to logistics later in the presentation, but it's typically that predetermined site where we can situate resources close to the impacted area to help expedite the response. And we also have designated government relations folks that serve as liaisons in our government partner office of emergency services, their emergency operations centers. Now for the incident command system, how do we integrate in business continuity in that overall response? We have business continuity positions located in our command staff in our emergency operations center. And this is a point of contact for departments, whether they're implementing their business continuity plans. We find out from the lines of business as to what's the status, do they need additional resources that we can provide, and we're also sharing incident information with them. Like for instance, we'll work with IT and facilities to monitor estimated time of restoration for facilities and IT systems that may be disrupting our business activity and provide that information out to the lines of business. We also would help activate our alternate company headquarters operations if needed. And also line of business calls are incorporated in with our emergency response calls throughout the incident. Now for scaling the restoration, we talked to organization in our emergency operations center. And out in the field, I mentioned that division operations emergency center. On the left is a picture of San Francisco division. And following catastrophic disasters such as an earthquake where there's widespread damage, instead of having just one division overseeing all of that, we would break it down into smaller branches, like Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta branches, for instance, where you'd have a different incident management team for each area, which would make the restoration much more manageable and efficient. And we'd also have gas and electric combined in these teams to help support that coordination. Now for logistics and scaling logistics, a key message here is that this is really a year-round effort to secure these agreements and maintain these relationships. And when I'm referring to a base camp, these are actually set up when there's a need to support crews in the field because a permanent facility is not accessible or it's not close enough to be of advantage to the field responders. So we'll set up this base camp, and sometimes it's staffed with an incident management team, contains food prep, showers, sleeping accommodations, and it has full-service connectivity and IT infrastructure to provide work packages and communications, has material laydown areas, vehicle refueling stations, temporary workspace, etc. And then we have microsites, which function as a satellite to the base camps. And these smaller sites are intended to allow for speedier deployment of resources by placing them even closer to the damaged areas. You know, for example, work packages may be developed at the base camp and then delivered out to the various microsites for distribution to the crews. And then we also have staging areas where typically out-of-area crews report upon arrival and prior to demobilizing, and they get a briefing and work assignments at those locations. Now, as you can see, this is really, again, a year-round effort with the agreements and maintaining those relationships. We also have vendor agreements to help us set these sites up very quickly. And we also provide all logistics support at the base camps while they're activated. And to kind of see what one looks like, this is just an example of a base camp that we used in response to Valley Fire in Northern California. On the side of technology, you know, it really plays a critical role in helping us to respond quickly to an incident. For instance, with smart meters, we can verify where the outages are in our service territory without waiting for assessment. And damage modeling is very powerful as it provides information within 15 minutes on where the damage will likely be, resource requirements, where inspections are needed. And on the gas side, Picaro vehicles provide low-level natural gas detection, which speeds our assessment by a factor of 100, actually. And we also have helicopter-mounted LIDAR, which is laser-illuminated detection and ranging, leak detection technology, which even helps us speed the surveys even more. And TAMI is a visualization tool that GAS uses for situational awareness. They can view the shake areas against assets and view leaks. In addition, we've looked at how can we improve our assessment out in the field following a disaster or even a storm situation. And we have these rapid assessment teams that are responsible for quickly patrolling damaged areas, conducting those windshield damage assessments, and then relaying that information. And we've implemented a field-to-base technology that allows site, GPS, device data, and even photos that are taken out in the field to be captured and validated very quickly by the field personnel, and then uploaded to central operations as the data is being collected. So instead of paper forms and maps and transporting those back and forth, they have tablet PCs, and that allows the data from the areas with the damage to be assembled by central operations as it's being collected. Now for DASH, in order to prepare effectively for an emergency response, advanced planning is necessary. A significant aspect of emergency planning and response involves the use of damage modeling information to estimate the impacts. And with DASH, or Dynamic Automated Seismic Hazard, these reports provide the information necessary to prioritize inspections following an earthquake. And as you can see on the slide, the DASH technology notifies PG&E personnel of the earthquake, identifies the assets that are affected, and helps us really prioritize what inspections do we need to do first and where, what's the damage, and what resources specifically are needed and where. And the three outputs from the model include an email notification, which is very high-level information, a face sheet, a graphical representation of where the damage is and how much damage, and we have a detailed CSV report or Excel report that gives us details on even what lines to inspect so that we can aid in planning. And the backup to this email and electronic information, so we have thumb drives and printed damage model maps, and printed, what are the required resources for different scenarios that may occur. Now for communications, we have these mobile command vehicles that are self-contained, and they're deployed within hours, and they have full communications capabilities, satellite, internet access. They have different workstations, so we can have our teams work from these vehicles, interoperable radios, and we've deployed them often to storms or fires and other events. And we also just deployed an MCV to Florida to help in the Hurricane Irma response. For strategic restoration, this is just an example of generation units we can deploy so we can get key customers up quickly before restoration. And we also developed key restoration strategies such as critical customer strategy. And that's, we have a list of critical and essential customers, but we also met with our governmental partners and secured who are their most important customers to help restore the community. And that ordered list is kept in each division and is used to help prioritize assessment and restoration following a catastrophic event. And a catastrophic event strategy, this is just an example of, percentage of resources we may designate to different tasks. For example, we may use 60% of resources dedicated to addressing outages with a high number of customers out of power or long outages or to critical equipment. 30% may be dedicated to those prioritized customers, and 10% to priority or unique issues that may come up during the incident. And for mutual assistance, this is really a given even for large storms, not necessarily catastrophic disasters. We secure these mutual assistance agreements in advance, and they've helped provide resources to make safe and restore our communities. We also attend quarterly meetings with our partners and maintain the relationships over time. One example is we needed to secure mutual assistance earlier this year for several storms, and we also sent over 125 people to Florida for Irma, including line workers, equipment operators, supervisors, and support personnel. So we really need to work together to be able to respond effectively to a disaster, because the very definition of a disaster is that you don't have enough resources internally to respond. Otherwise, it would just be considered an emergency or incident. And as part of this, building those partnerships and external presence is really key, because we can't do it alone. It's essential to coordinate the response with our partners, whether it's California Office of Emergency Services at the state level, the Red Cross, or our local emergency management, EEI, lifelines councils in some of the major cities, as well as working with the Offices of Emergency Services in the different counties to identify customers. And as part of this, we've talked about all these preparations, but we test it through not only incidents that occur, but also through exercises. And we may conduct like a tabletop discussion, a drill, a functional exercise, or even full scale where we're moving crews out in the field, moving equipment, setting up the base camps out in the field, and really simulating and testing these concepts. And we work with our external partners on this. We run different scenarios each year, and we do exercises throughout the year. And really, this is a key to assess, are these plans working, and could they work, and to identify issues and improve upon those issues over time. And some of the results of continuous improvement is we had a 6.0 magnitude earthquake back in 2014 up in Napa, and it was the largest Bay Area quake in 25 years. And as an example of this, we restored 99% of customers within just 24 hours. So it was an effective and efficient response to that earthquake. So in closing, we need to really manage the risk from these large disasters, and it's really a matter of when, not if, for many utilities out there. And we are maintaining that approach of continuous improvement. Can't stress enough on how much this is a year-round, year-to-year effort. We can't rest on our laurels once we improve things. We constantly, following each incident and exercise, produce after-action reports where we can assess, how did we do? What went well and what could be improved? And then really keeping in mind that we're really trying to provide service to our communities and making sure we have an efficient, effective, and safe response. And with regards to disasters, our employees can't be present unless they know their families are safe and that they themselves are prepared. So we really stress personal disaster preparedness as well. And with that, I'll hand that back over to Lawrence Jones. I believe you're keeping questions to the end. Is that correct?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Thank you very much, Stepha, for that very, very rich presentation that I think has given a very good perspective. And we'll get back to the Q&A because I think some of the issues you raised will certainly be ones that I think will resonate both in terms of the tools and technology, but also in terms of the processes and the amount of effort that is put into this. So, again, thank you so much. Let's now turn over to Rod. And Rod is based in Christchurch, New Zealand. And obviously, they have had their share of events over the years and have developed a very robust set of activities. So, Rod, I'll turn over to you, Rod.
Thank you, Lawrence. I understand there's a video that can be played now, so I'll just, by way of introduction, Orion is a electricity network. We are a poles and wires business. We don't generate electricity and we don't retail. We have around about 200,000 connections, 200,000 customers, serving a population of around 400,000 customers over 8,000 square kilometres, which is probably about just over 3,000 square miles. So we're at the other end of the scale and, compared to PG&E, but we have been through our challenges. And so just to touch on that, I'd just like to play this video now, which will really provide some context.
In the centre of the city, we had 6,000 companies that just had to cut and run. The city was then cordoned off for a couple of years. So that was an incredibly graphic example of how the earthquakes impacted on business. A community without business is a community that will collapse. We had no power, we had no water, we had no sewage, we had no effective supply chains. We were frustrated for 2 years in getting back into our central city, and that's where the likes of the Canterbury Employers Chamber of Commerce and the Canterbury Development Corporation, through a joint venture called Recover Canterbury, came to be a safe pair of hands for business. And with all of the frustrations that we've had, this is now a city with opportunity.
It would be another tragedy not to make the most of it and take advantage of the opportunity we've been given. I don't think any one of us took our eyes off the prize, which is a 21st century city. We've really felt extremely positive about what our city is going to become. It really will live up to that reputation.
I know for a fact that 80% of the land in our central city is either consented or there is building underway. And I always like to remind people that we're only halfway through the construction side of the rebuild. We've spent about $17 billion reconstructing commercial buildings, housing stock, and horizontal infrastructure, including all of our underground wiring and everything. We've still got about $17 billion to spend just to get the reconstruction side of our city up and running. I don't know anywhere in the world where $100 million a week is being consistently applied to the rebuild of a city of 400,000 people. We're going to be the safest city in the Southern Hemisphere, because although we've got a seismic history and we'll probably have a seismic future, we're building to accommodate that. We're going to have an energy efficient city, because all of our buildings are being built to new code. We've got 25,000 houses that are either being completely rebuilt or seriously repaired. So the whole energy profile of the city is changing.
All of the companies that the City Council owns have absolutely stepped up to the plate. We've got a seaport that's going to be completely transformed. The airport company, for example, the direct flights that we now have coming in internationally, that's just transformed the South Island economy. I mean, not just Christchurch. Orion was in an outstanding position. There was a company that a long time before the earthquake happened actually calculated risk. If they hadn't spent the money that they did on reinforcing the small substations around the city, then we would have been without power for over 3 months as opposed to 3 weeks. We actually have the opportunity to embed smart technology into the future. It's a smart city, it's an intelligent city, it's a resilient city. The companies that serve the city have really served the city well and will take us into that 21st century. We've had an ambition in this city for 20,000 people to be living within inside the 4 avenues. If we could deliver that, then I think we'll set this place on fire.
It will be a city that faces its future, and it will be a city that appreciates its place in the South Island.
All right. That's just a little bit of the context of where we are today. Of course, what we saw there was really the rebuild after some severe earthquakes in 2010 and 11, and many thousands of aftershocks since. But the topic, the title of my slide presentation is Resilience Every Day, and it's a real focus on every decision we make. So when I talk about resilience every day, it's not just about when we have adrenaline flowing through us and big things are happening. It's the times when there's no adrenaline which really count, so well in advance of big events. So the first thing we look at as an organisation is, what is our community? What do our community want from us in terms of aspirations? And what does the community want to achieve? We see a community that wants a very strong connected community, healthy and prosperous, and a community that's sustainable and innovative. And so we have to be real in that environment. One of the things we think about is resilience of our community. And as such, resilience takes many forms, including people being warm and safe in their homes. So we are very much integrated with other organisations that we support, like Community Energy Action. This organisation insulates low-income households and is a real part of our DNA. But, you know, big events happen quite regularly for us, some of them bigger than others. So here's a few examples of mini disasters that happen from time to time, from flooding, the severe windstorms, the snowstorms. And on the bottom left there is a selection of population centres in New Zealand, just to give a snapshot of the fact that midwinter we're the coldest of the main centres. And so we have an environment, a community that is very dependent on electricity for heating as well as other things. And as such, we have a responsibility to have not only a network that's adequate, but beyond adequate for the context we have. Now, as an organisation, for many years we've thought about not only earthquakes and fires and flooding, etc., but also just in a broader sense, how do we respond to any type of emergency? So the important thing there is that we have an overall plan and people know what their role is in managing an event before and after. So we have people whose roles are dedicated to readiness, reduction, response and recovery, and they have backups as well. Now, we're a much smaller organisation than PG&E. We have around about 200 staff in our core business and around 300 in a subsidiary of field workers, and we don't have multiple depots everywhere. So we have to have a mantra in terms of plan to plan, which means that we're very careful about not having detailed plans for everything that can stymie immediate response. So we have generalised plans, and then we get down to having a specific plan for the event at hand. One of the things from a people perspective is, for our staff and for the public, is just having a common model of human response to emergencies. And you can see on the screen there the psychosocial phases of recovery model, which we utilise, really just making sure people are aware of the people around them and the state they will be in, and when you can share certain types of information with them. Now, this is a stylised diagram, and so for any particular individual, the dates and timeframes will be different. But still, it's a useful way to actually break through barriers and make sure we're having a conversation about people's states before we share and seek information from them. These have become images which are synonymous with Christchurch for many people in infrastructure sectors around the world. We had a lot of brick substations which were some decades old, and during the 1990s we started a program of seismic reinforcement of these substations. And the Mayor of Christchurch mentioned in the video that if this reinforcement program had not been done, we would have been without power for months. I think she underestimates the 3 months. I think if the electrical equipment had been damaged by bricks for many of these substations, it would have been many months without power. The substation on the right, in fact, was sold to a third party well before the earthquakes, and yet is only a few hundred yards from the substation on the left. And so it provides a very good example of what would have happened had we not seismically reinforced these buildings. Now, it cost $6 million to do that work in total, and we're talking many dozens of buildings, and that was a very small amount of money spread over about 15 years. Now, it saved us around about $60 million in direct costs, but a much bigger number in terms of the cost that would have occurred to the people who would have not been served by those systems. One of the things we're very clear on is that our organisation is very different today than in 2011. Not only are more than 50% of our staff new due to growth and due to retirement, but those who were with us in 2011 have experiences that have really changed them. They've had career changes and a massive workload, and the pinch points that affected our company are quite different. So we were known as a highly reliable, efficient network before the quakes. Post-quake, what really made our reputation was our ability to connect people And that's a big focus for us. Being connectors, not only in terms of assets, but as human beings, is a big part of who we are today. And we've been very conscious about change of our organisation and improvements we've made and continue to make. And to do that, we share this model, the human synergistics change model, with all our staff, and we train them in it. And this is very relevant to resilience, because resilience isn't something that happens once in a while when big things are happening. It happens every day. You've got to build resilience in your organisation, and there's nothing more resilient than an organisation that communicates well and cares for each other. And so we think about change, and we train people in this, and they can call us out as managers if we're not following this model without a good reason. So employee resilience, absolutely. Employee resilience supports the organisational resilience. Communicating a shared purpose, emphasising the scoreboard. This is something that I think people forget. They quite often stare at their to-do list and get worried. In fact, it's very important that we give credit before seeking improvements, act with respect and involve employees in decisions about their work, and as I've mentioned, train all managers in the company's change process. If there's one theme I'd like to leave with you today, it's very much that safety, productivity and resilience are all outcomes. They're outcomes of everyday decisions. They're not a silo. And so you often hear people talk about safety as an outcome of every decision. It's the same with resilience. We also have a big focus on teamwork and community connectedness. So here's a picture of our new head office where when the earthquakes happened, we put all our critical computer equipment in a Rittle container. And when we built the new building, rather than incorporate all that technology inside our building and have a bigger building, we decided to have a smaller building and a less complex building with less conflict between systems. So we built this pad and we put all our essential equipment in it. And this Rittle container can be transported by a truck to another location where there is fibre. We now have several of these containers, and it means that should anything happen to the building or that location, we can still continue to run our network from multiple locations. I like to show this picture because it's just a reminder that we're not just about earthquakes. We have to be prepared for a lot of other things, including pandemics, which needs a different approach altogether in terms of making sure we're not rushing a whole lot of staff into one location for obvious reasons. So we have a lot of equipment ready for different types of scenarios, and it's a reminder to organisations that we're not just preparing for one type of event. I think around New Zealand I've shared a lot of practical experiences with other utilities. And some of these are obvious on the screen there, but one I'd like to focus on really is making sure that you take every opportunity. So if you're doing a fire drill and you have all your staff out in the parking lot, there's an opportunity while you've gathered them all together to talk about, so what if the building had burnt down? What have you got in your pockets? How would we actually operate from here? Are we actually following what we said we'd do in terms of preparedness for big events? So never let an opportunity like that go by. The other thing I'd focus on is before our biggest earthquake in 2011, we had shared all our essential communications information in terms of who our stakeholders are and how to communicate with them with other organisations at the far end of our country, so that when the big earthquake happened in February 2011, we could simply get the first few sentences to those parties and they could do all the administration in terms of getting our messages out to important stakeholders. And that bought us considerable time. When your building is damaged by an earthquake, your houses are damaged, you're wondering where your families are and whether they're safe, making things as simple as possible and reaching out to others by asking is incredibly important, and setting that up before an event is absolutely essential. One of the things I'd like to end on really is that we had many experiences where getting the power back on is more than just an energy supply. It's about hope and confidence. And many people, particularly low-income people, are benefited most by resilience of infrastructure. They have few options and often return home to wait for services to be restored. And we're really, as a lifeline service, a foundation for community. And restoration of utilities is the strongest sign that normality can indeed return. So I've rushed through about 14, 15 slides there. Happy to take questions now and also in the future if any of you want to be in touch. I'm happy to talk on other subjects. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rod, and thank you, Tessa. Let's get into the Q&A here so we can try to get as many questions in as possible. So I think I'll start off with one question that both of you can address. What is interesting, Rob, is that both you and Tessa, your organizations and utilities in general, are focusing on serving customers. And so to what extent have each of your respective organizations communicated and educated your customers about all of these efforts you're doing to make the system resilient? Can you talk a little bit about the process of educating your customers about your resiliency efforts and the preparedness you're going on so that they can be aware of it? Can you talk about that?
Yes, it's Rob here. We've done a considerable amount of communication post-quake via the media and website, etc., about our plans to make the network and our supply more resilient, but it's not just about assets, it's about other things. And we've been reported in the media quite extensively since 2011. Since then, it's been more of an outreach program with key stakeholders, making sure they're aware of our activities. We have twice a year we have meetings with our major customers in a large seminar, and frequently the conversation there, the presentations are about just this resilience and preparedness. But I think there's something else here, and that is that we talk about twin pillars of resilience and sustainability. And so I think around the world people are very focused on sustainability and making sure that you don't lose an opportunity to talk about them both. Many people become quite excited about, in our patch, around electric vehicles, for example. We have a highly renewable power supply, and so there's a big opportunity to electrify our transport system. People are very excited about that conversation. While we're talking to them about that, they understand that you need a resilient power supply if you're going to be reliant on it for your transport as well as all these other things. So there's an in there to have a good conversation about resilience, leveraging off your other conversations.
And to piggyback off of that, at PG&E, we have, through media releases and in educating the media, through social media, through our website, we really promote the efforts that we're making in terms of asset resiliency, exercises we've done, some of the preparedness measures we've executed on. And we're also very, take the opportunity when we're responding to incidents to emphasize how we're improving over time as well. And we have, just like in New Zealand, we have meetings with regulators, our public safety partners, our partners in Office of Emergency Services. We have community relations and government relations groups that also meet regularly with our external partners to really educate them on the efforts that we're doing and to coordinate our efforts with them. So we do kind of continuous education, throughout the year, and they've seen the results of increasing our emergency response capabilities, and we in the different methods that we do to make sure that we're ready in case disaster strikes.
Okay, that's good. Another thing I'd like to talk about is the issue of the cost of investments in resilience. Obviously, I'm not expecting you to give me exact numbers, but how did you all get regulatory buy-in for making these kinds of investments?
Well, it's Rob here again. That's a question I get asked a lot. What I would say is that often resilience doesn't cost as much as you might think. There are some forms of resilience that certainly don't cost so much. One of the things is that when you're confronted with an elephant, you can't eat the whole thing at once. So what can you do with the money you've got? And make sure that when you're budgeting for resilience, that it's actually part of something else. So, for example, I often find people are more convinced that there's a need to spend money when you focus on safety than something that's hard to describe completely as resilience. I think if we take the example of our substation reinforcement, we knew our owners were happy to spend a certain amount each year, and so we started a program based on the most critical elements and get those done first. But it is a constant area of education for stakeholders like regulators. I don't believe for a minute that our regulators have all the answers or have a complete understanding. So in that environment, it's up to us to keep educating them and to keep pushing it forward.
And we also have...
You want to add anything?
Sure. We also have kind of that focus on safety and reliability and talking with our external stakeholders and, you know, kind of making it clear the importance of it. And every rate approved by our regulators is really designed to ensure, you know, the resiliency of our assets and of PG&E, and that safety and reliability of our system is critical. I mean, the work we do every day, from maintaining and improving our infrastructure to planning and preparing through drills and exercises, really allows us to be ready when disaster strikes and really keep the lights on, so to speak. And we found that, you know, some of the asset resilience costs for infrastructure improvements are paid through kind of a combination of shareholders funding, equity rounds, as well as debt. So we really work to really get that message out of safety and reliability, and we found that that's been effective.
So I want to talk about, so we're currently going through, as we started this conversation, talking about the recent events, obviously Hurricane Harvey and Irma and other events in India and elsewhere. And so it would seem as if, you know, the occurrences of these extreme events is becoming almost sort of the new normal. And so in terms of planning, as you look at various scenarios, how do you imagine how do you imagine the unthinkable? I mean, where do you stretch your imagination in terms of planning? I mean, how much resilience do you need? What are the kinds of events? So how do you come up with those scenarios in terms of what's the system designed to withstand, both in terms of extreme events, but even from a business continuity standpoint? So how do you think about these scenarios? How do you generate these different scenarios internally?
Well, it's Rob here. One of the things we do is exactly what we're doing right now, which is to talk to others and to expand our concepts of what is actually possible, what could happen out there. So that's the first critical step. I think also as we think about these things, we can convince ourselves that we need the very strongest possible asset that could never come to grief no matter what happens out there, and that's unfeasible. So it's very much a case of, okay, you need to assume if the worst happens and everything is out, what next? What is the next fail? How could we make a difference for our community if it actually fails? So there's a couple of thoughts.
And we do a detailed risk evaluation, you know, looking at, you know, our assets and what are the types of hazards that can happen. We work with our external partners and experts, whether it's USGS or governmental partners, and take information on, you know, where are the flood zones? What is the likelihood of tsunamis? What are some of the different earthquake scenarios that could happen? You know, working with our meteorology department on looking at, you know, the types of historical storms as well as, you know, what we're starting to see going forward. So really doing a lot of the damage modeling and other modeling that we have and coming up with these various scenarios. And you're not going to think of everything that could possibly happen. So I think the key is to plan to increase your core capabilities, your operational coordination, your communications, your planning, creating resilience in those core capabilities to respond to any type of hazard is really important. And then being able to secure and have the agreements in place so you can secure additional resources to supplement your own, depending on how large of a disaster it is and the incident complexity. So it's really looking at working with the external partners, doing our own risk evaluations, and really building our core capabilities.
So before we get to one last question, I would like to ask each of you Rob and Tessa, if you guys have questions for each other. So maybe, Tessa, you can ask Rob a question, and Rob, you can ask Tessa a question.
Sure. So in the response to the recent earthquakes, I know there was a series of earthquakes that occurred. And how long did it take for kind of returning communities to some type of normalcy? Or did you feel that you really needed to rebuild your infrastructure from scratch in many areas?
No, the impact on our network, while significant, wasn't overwhelming. The impact on our community was more about people having to shift. We had a lot of liquefaction in one part of our city, which meant thousands of households had to leave that part of the city, and so we had to therefore build infrastructure to feed the growth in other parts of our region where new houses were being built. But we also had a lot of impact on our CBD, and so our actual cable network, we have a very undergrounded network in most of our city. The underground cables there, most of them were actually intact and in reasonable condition, so there's plenty of capacity sitting there. We're now just going through the process of the buildings being rebuilt and connecting those customers. So a question for Tessa, what I would say is we've had a lot of contact with PG&E over the years, and just in the last few hours actually. Do I have a question? My question really is, in terms of stakeholders, particularly like regulators, how successful have you been, do you think, in terms of making sure they understand the concept of resilience and separating and making sure that when they're talking about rate cases or actually getting money, that resilience is actually on the table at the same time and not something separate?
Well, I think that we've been successful in talking with our regulators about resilience and the need for resilience. And we actually have, there's a general order, we call it General Order 166, where it actually stipulates by the Commission what needs to be in our emergency response plans. What kind of response do we need to have in terms of our customer contact centers and sharing information with the public, and even put set time frames on some of these things as well. So they're well aware and kind of bought into the need for that, that resilience. And we actually have, there's actually a catastrophic event memorandum account mechanism through the CPUC, where if it's a state or federal declaration of disaster, some costs can be recovered for restoring the utility services to customers and repairing, replacing, restoring some of the damaged facilities. So they're very much, a partner with us in terms of, building that resilience over time.
Well, we've come to 8:02, which is just about the end of our webinar. But before we do, I'd like to just ask Dr. Rob one last question. And basically, obviously we've made a lot of success in our strides around the world to address the issue of resilience, disaster preparedness. We've seen that the utilities are doing a much better job with restoration time. If you were to identify one area where there could be more could be done as an industry, what would be that area you would identify where you would say we still need to do more, either in your respective organizations, but as an industry at large? So just two suggestions of what we could do better as an industry to be even more resilient in how we provide services to our customers.
Okay, it's Rob here. One of the things is that there are a lot of service providers outside of electricity who are making decisions about their technologies in such a way that they're becoming more reliant on electricity rather than less. And yet, when the power is out and those services cease, of course, people look to us and say, well, why haven't you sorted this? Why haven't you improve the situation. So the reality is making sure we're having a lot more influence, a lot more conversations with other providers such as telecommunications providers to make sure that the consequences of their decisions around technology are understood. I think that's a key one from our end.
Thanks, Rob. Yes, sir?
So I think when you mentioned what more can be done as an industry, and talking with colleagues and other utilities, I think we're really good at looking at, well, how do we restore our service to our customers, but then how do we integrate in business continuity in that as well? Because, you know, following a massive disaster, you're going to have tech down. Your communications are going to be impacted. How can you continue to operate and continue those mission-critical processes along with the emergency response and integrating that, I think is a key thing that, you know, in terms of the industry, we can really do better at. Also, you know, as was mentioned, the customer expectations are higher. There's a real, you know, greater reliance on technologies and, as a result, electricity to even do business in many cases. And the expectations of faster restoration times is real. So how do we continuously, year after year, improve those restoration times is a key concern and can always be improved.